in modern society, to me, Thanksgiving means a day of eating, a day of drinking, and a day of watching football, which I think those might be my three favorite things in the world. So not too bad.
You're listening to Let's Talk Fantasy Football, where men of fantasy genius have realized, hey guys, we don't need real football skills to dominate on the fantasy field. Yeah! So slap on your pads and grab your helmet. Shit's about to get real.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Let's Talk Fantasy Football. I'm your host tonight. My name is Nick Walsh, and I'm here for the Week 12 recap and Thanksgiving slate preview. All on my own tonight, which is fine. It's a busy week. We here at Let's Talk Fantasy Football, we do all have our day jobs. Everyone else is trying to make sure they get everything done before the family time coming up with Thanksgiving. I am personally, I live about 3,000 miles away from my family, so I will be doing a Friendsgiving on Wednesday evening and then lying on my couch and most likely ordering Chinese food on Thursday because I plan on being too full from the traditional Thanksgiving fare that I will be having on Wednesday night. I'm too hungover from the egregious amount of gin and tonics that I am going to drink on Wednesday night to make another traditional Thanksgiving meal. So there you go. That's my plan. As I mentioned, tonight is the Week 12 recap as well as a preview of the first three games of Week 13. Of course, we do have three games on Thanksgiving. I'm going to be coming at them with both the season-long perspective and also if you're in a state that offers it, I fucking highly recommend playing the Thanksgiving Day slates on DraftKings or FanDuel or your preferred daily fantasy site. Yahoo is also a fun one to do. Just because it's a really fun way to sweat the day. If you're like me and your primary function of the day is just literally going to be watching football rather than making conversation with family members or, catching up with your aunt that you haven't seen in a long time or any of these things that's really, really sound terrible compared to lying on the couch with Chinese food, watching football and getting mad at Mitch Trubisky, who you played on DraftKings for some reason. Then I really think it's a great time. So I'll go into a little bit of that. I don't have, all of the pricing down pat at this point, so I won't be going into specific plays or anything like that. But I will be mentioning a couple things I like in that sort of sense. I think without further ado, guys, I'm going to get right into this recap. So we do have a little bit of news coming out of Week 12. Biggest news we got, Andy Dalton. He's back. We thought he was done with the Bengals forever. We thought the benching, the move to Ryan Finley would be it. They're bringing him back, folks. He gets the Jets this week. I'm going to play him. No, I'm not going to play him. But this is important news because, up until this week when they sort of forced the ball to Tyler Boyd after he complained, Ryan Finley had been just atrocious at getting the ball to, targets that we wanted him to. I think what Dalton does, Joe Mixon benefited from Ryan Finley just because he was getting force-fed the ball. But I think what Dalton does is he sort of ups these Cincinnati pass catchers, so particularly Tyler Boyd, who I think is the most relevant one. He's the one that I have a lot of, certainly. I think if you're a Tyler Boyd owner, you love this news because we know that Dalton trusts him. We know he likes to go to him. And I think Erickson and Tate, if you're super desperate at this point still in the season, I think they get upgrades as well. But hopefully you're not really going in that direction. The second bit of news, sticking in the AFC North, Devlin Hodges, or Duck Hodges, as he is called, because apparently he can do a duck call super well. I don't know. He posted a picture on Twitter of him and James Washington hunting what might have been a duck. It might have been a turkey. I don't know. I don't hunt. I don't know what birds are. Talk to Don about it. He loves hunting turkeys. The DON, big time hunter. But maybe not big time, but decent amount. Anyway, Duck Hodges likely to start for the Steelers this week. That means we get Mason Rudolph out of my fucking sight, which is wonderful. I do not like that guy at all as a player or as a person from what he seems like. So that's nice, but I really don't think this does much for the Steelers offense really at all. And they're in a bit of shambles to begin with. Pretty much James Washington is the only one who had a usable week, and Benny Snell this past week. We'll get into their backfield a little bit later on in the cast, but for now, just know that Duck Hodges will be the starter. I don't think it matters too much for fantasy, but we'll figure it out. Third piece of news here, the Eagles waived Jordan Matthews, who was out on the field for almost every snap this past week. That would seem to imply that we should be getting Aguilar or Alshon Jeffrey back this week. It was a lot of Arcega-Whiteside and Matt Collins and Greg Ward this past week. I don't think this matters too much for fantasy purposes. And then one more bit of news, Chase Edmonds expected to come back in week 13. That's going to lead to a bit of a muddled backfield in Arizona, I think. You might have been relying on Kenyon Drake. They also had their bye that last week, which may have allowed David Johnson to get a bit healthier. I think I'm going to be employing a wait and see approach going forward with this backfield, but we'll have some more information about that in the rest of the week preview later on in the week. I should have mentioned that earlier. The week 13 preview outside of these three games will likely be coming to you in one part. I would assume as a podcast on Saturday morning, potentially in two parts, but definitely on Saturday morning because I will be recording it, I think with Shrek, on Friday night. With Thanksgiving, none of us can really record Wednesday or Thursday. So Friday is the time we will be doing it. And then that should be coming to your ears on Saturday morning. So keep an eye out for that. We'll have a lot more information on, the Andy Daltons and the Duck Hodges and the Chase Edmonds of the world. I forgot to mention before, guys, if you're new to me doing a solo podcast, if you hear long breaks, it's because I'm drinking. I have wine again. I have the $6 1.5 liter bottle of wine. It's very nice. That was not your podcast app malfunctioning. That was me taking a break to drink. All right, guys, let's get into some injuries here. Eric Ebron needs surgery on both ankles. I didn't see the exact injury, but he needs surgery on both ankles. He will be out for the year. The Colts are very, very thin at pass catcher. We'll get into some T.Y. Hilton information later. But to me, the headline of this is that I think Jack Doyle becomes weekly viable. And Mo Alley Cox is going to get some run, that's for sure. We'll see after this week how much run he really does get. He's a talented guy. He's an athletic guy. But for me, Jack Doyle becomes a guy who is elevated from maybe streamer conversation to like, hey, you should – someone in your league should probably be starting Jack Doyle at this point. Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz has a bruised right hand. He is still expected to play against Miami, but God, he has looked just terrible the past 2 weeks, against the Patriots. And then again, you expect it more against the Patriots, but against the Seahawks, that's a matchup where Carson Wentz should be, really crushing. And in his defense, he was missing Alshon Jeffrey. He was missing Nelson Aguilar, who's really the only speed threat on this team right now. And, of course, he's been missing Deshaun Jackson all year. So outside of the two tight ends, Ertz and Goddard, he really does not have any reliable pass catchers. So we'll see how that changes going into this week. You really want to be able to trust the guy against Miami. We just saw what Josh Allen did against them. We just saw what Baker Mayfield did against them. So you want to be able to trust it, but he's making it hard. I need more news. I need more information, and that's a game that we will dive into in significant detail on the preview podcast later in the week. Golden Tate of the Giants is in the concussion protocol after he apparently got hurt on that touchdown that he caught. He got up in the end zone but sort of landed in between two guys, supposedly got a concussion. My assumption would be that Sterling Shepard would slide into the slot if Golden Tate does not go. Shepard was playing the slot in the first 4 weeks of the season when Golden Tate was suspended. And Shepard had 9 targets this past week on the outside. He didn't do anything with them. I think it was 5 catches for 15 yards. But, Sterling Shepard immediately becomes a more interesting play The Giants just cut Benny Fowler, who, if it wasn't Shepard, I would assume Fowler would have been the next up in the slot. So, if Tate misses, my assumption it would be that they'll have Shepard, Darius Slayton, and Cody Latimer out there on the outside. So we'll see how that goes. We'll have to see whether Evan Ingram can suit up this week. Their offense in general has a lot of news as well to go. Taylor Gabriel, another wide receiver with a concussion. He's a guy that I had a lot of in daily in that game. I got a little bit too heavy on that game, though it worked out in the Trubisky-Robinson sense. I think that my best lineup was a Trubisky-Robinson stack, which is funny, if nothing else. But Taylor Gabriel definitely sunk a couple lineups for me. It turns out it was because of a concussion. He only played about half of the snaps. He is not currently practicing. And with their game on Thursday, you would assume he will not be able to go. I will get into some more detail on the plays that I think are of importance. Consequently, I'm trying to say too many fancy words. I've already had a decent amount of wine while I was preparing for this, but I will get into the plays that I think you should be considering with Taylor Gabriel out here. And there actually are a couple. It's a good matchup. We'll get into that later. Over to my Oakland Raiders, who broke my heart this past week with a 34-3 loss against the Jets. And while they were breaking my heart, Hunter Renfrow broke his rib. How do you like that for a segue? I don't know. Whatever kind of rhetorical device, whatever I just said was. How do you like that shit? Hunter Renfrow, broken rib and punctured lung. That sounds painful. I don't know how long he will be out. I don't think it has been released, but I would assume he is not going to go this week. They play the Chiefs. We expect that to be a high-scoring matchup. It remains to be seen how they sort of deal with this. Does that mean more Trevor Davis? Does that mean more two tight end sets with Darren Waller and Foster Moreau? Do we see Jalen Richard on the field a little more, maybe lining up out in the slot? I don't have answers. We'll sort of get into some speculation on that and really the important things to come from it again in the preview. But for now, Hunter Renfrow does not seem likely to be playing. Two Dolphins wide receivers also got hurt this past week, Jakeem Grant and Albert Wilson, who had both been kind of splitting time in the slot. They are both fast, small, big play guys. Jakeem Grant, high ankle sprain, may be shut down for the season. That sucks. He had a really, really nice punt or kick. I want to say it was a punt return for a touchdown a couple weeks ago. He's an exciting player. Albert Wilson left the game with a ribs injury in Week 12. I have not seen an update since then, and I do not know whether he is going to play or not. More concentrated targets around the Dolphins to me just means more Devontae Parker and maybe more Mike Gesicki. Getting to some non-skill position players, Dontari Poe, nose tackle for the Panthers, torn quad, out for the season. The Panthers' run D had been very bad this year, and Dontari Poe was PFF's third highest graded interior defender for run defense. So losing that guy should make them an absolute fucking sieve going forward. So keep that in mind. This is a matchup that we have liked, and I think we're going to like it even more as we continue forward in the season. The other one to think about is Brian Bulaga, the right tackle for the Packers. Sprained right MCL. I think it downgrades the whole Packers offense. This is where the Packers have really struggled in recent years, is when their offensive line gets hurt. And they've had some pretty good luck this year. This is not great luck. We'll see how long the injury lasts and what sort of effects that it has. Wow, I can hear the rain coming down outside my window. I'm in San Francisco. We haven't really had rain in like 6 months. And of course, because of that, I just never check the weather, because it's always going to be somewhere between like 50 and 68 or whatever in San Francisco at this time of year. More like 64 probably. But today it was like 46 and now it's raining. So that shit sucks, but I am extremely lucky in terms of weather. So you probably don't want to hear me complain. I'm sure someone is listening to this in Ohio right now and is like, hey, fuck you, dude. Fair, completely fair assessment on your end. I will stop talking about the rain outside of my house. Let's get into some cool shit. This first one, near and dear to my heart. If you were listening to the podcast in the off season, you know that I said In 10 and 12 team leagues, if you have a draft pick at the beginning of the draft and George Kittle is sitting there at the beginning of the third round, he is an auto pick. He was for me. I own him in 4 out of my 6 leagues, my just regular season long leagues, that is. And George Kittle came back this past week, and he looked great. He's just a really fun player to watch. He's one of those guys who, it's possible to get biased towards him because he really is just so fun to watch, not even fantasy-wise. Like, he bounces off of guys. He's a great blocker. He seems like he's, like, a really cool dude. Like, he loves wrestling, and he's, like, really enthusiastic and all this stuff. I want to be friends with him is what I'm saying. But this past week, he went 6 catches on 6 targets, 129 yards, and a touchdown. That's a great game. George Kittle is back, and he is spectacular. Next bit of good shit. Jonathan Williams is legitimately a dude. So there was a lot of uncertainty going into this week, and I avoided this situation even as a Marlon Mack owner in one of my leagues because I was really not sure how this was going to break down. Of course, Williams had gotten a lot of the work the week before, but it was the right game script for a guy who's primarily a runner, not really a pass catcher. Jordan Wilkins had been inactive, so I didn't know how that was going to work. Turns out Williams was just the correct call. In on 67% of snaps for the Colts, 26 carries, 104 yards, 1 touchdown, and he even added 3 catches for 17 yards on 3 targets through the air. So that's really good. This was a game that went back and forth a little bit, this game with the Texans on Thursday night. It feels like forever ago now. But yeah, Williams was clearly the guy, and while Mack is out, it seems like unless they were just really easing Wilkins back in, and of course these are always fluid situations, as we'll get to with some other backfields. But as of right now, Williams is the guy you want to be playing on the Colts. Nyheim Hines went in there. He had 33% of the snaps, 9 carries, 51 yards, 3 targets, 2 catches, 10 yards. That's not bad. It's not great either. Williams is clearly the guy. Jordan Wilkins, 1 snap, no touches. All right, Leonard Fournette got in the end zone not once but twice and also had 12 targets in this game. In a game where the Jags really got messed up, Fournette was just spectacular. This was sort of the game Fournette owners have been looking for all year because he's been very consistent with his work. He's gotten a lot of it. He's produced decently well. He's gotten at least, a couple targets every week. But the end zone is what we were looking for. It felt like he might never score a touchdown at this point. It was sort of becoming an ongoing joke on Twitter. He did it. Hopefully he continues to do it. I would say the weak shit in this situation is that Nick Foles has really been subpar since his return. I haven't been watching the Jags these past couple of weeks, forgive me. But statistically, Foles has not been it. I know week 1 he fed DJ Shark. This week he didn't. Fournette led the team in targets, and then sort of Westbrook and Conley were next, I believe, with Shark also featuring in. But yeah, it's a little tough to know what to trust. We'll get into more of that in the preview coming up this Friday. For the Browns, Jarvis Landry on a fucking tear. I meant to write his stats for the past couple weeks down before. I did not do it, so I am just looking up his stats over the last couple games very quickly. So yeah, check this shit out. Since week 8, that's 5 games for this team. At least 10 targets in 4 out of 5 games. Has scored at least 1 touchdown in 4 out of those 5 games as well. This past week was really his magnum opus performance of the season. 13 targets, 10 catches, 148 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's a hell of a game. That would have won you some money in daily. I was not on it. I was all over OBJ, was not on Jarvis Landry. OBJ still did okay. The Browns, the opponents have been, I shouldn't say that. The opponent this week was conducive to a great performance, but the Browns seem like they're really kind of coming into their own a little bit later in the year. I'm not sure if it's a coincidence, if it's, since the Kareem Hunt return, that they've really sort of come into their own, but I don't think it's hurting. And I don't think it's hurt Nick Chubb a ton really either. He was pretty great this week as well. They get Pittsburgh this week in a rematch from 2 weeks ago where Myles Garrett hit Mason Rudolph in the head with his own helmet. Luckily, neither person will be playing in that game. All right, last bit of cool shit that we've got to go through. Derrick Henry, just straight up baller. He's a guy who, in good matchups, in matchups where the Titans are favored, you always want to be playing him. But this is a narrative, and it's not based on any sort of stats. But as the weather gets colder, this is what happened last year. Derrick Henry just started going nuts. And while it's definitely a narrative, I think intuitively it makes sense. You've got this big bruising running back. Every defense in the NFL has played 11 games at this point. Guys are worn down. The weather's getting colder. They don't want to take hits from this fucking guy. His 74-yard touchdown this week, he was just saying, "Get off me, pussy," the entire time. Again, it's a narrative. It's not based on anything that we can look at the spreadsheets that I love so dearly and say this is what it is. Like, this is the kind of shit that Don tells you. But at the same time, I think there's a chance it's real. They get Indianapolis this week. They're not a great run defense. I think he's, a great play. Despite his lack of involvement in the passing game, this is sort of the time of year where Derrick Henry has heated up. And, he's been very, very good this year anyway, even without that sort of narrative. So, good for Derrick Henry. Good for Derrick Henry owners. Hopefully it continues. All right, guys, we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with some week shit and then a preview of the Thanksgiving slate.
Have you thought about trying sports betting but aren't sure how it'll go? Our friends at FanDuel are giving away a $50 sign-up bonus at letstalkfantasyfootball.com/FanDuel-sportsbook.
Welcome back, everybody. It is still your old pal Walsh. I'm still here with the Week 12 recap and the preview of the Thanksgiving slate. As I mentioned before, this is not sponsored by any means, but if you're not playing daily on Thanksgiving and you live in a state where it's legal and you have accounts, I would reconsider it. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to go through some of my thoughts a little bit later when we preview the games to maybe help you guys out a little bit. It's fun to throw some lineups in some tournaments. That's the way that I kind of look at it. And it makes Thanksgiving itself a lot more fun, particularly if you can pay attention to the games. If you, if you can't pay attention to the games, if you have a big family gathering where no one wants the TV on or whatever, I would not recommend it, because then you will be stressed and trying to check your phone the entire time. If that's the case, concentrate on the family time. Don't take my advice from before. All right, guys, we are going to get into some weak shit, and that's going to include a couple whack-ass backfields. All right, weak shit. T.Y. Hilton. He came back this past week. That's good. We like that. The issue is that he only played on 25 of their 67 offensive snaps, and he said in his quotes after the game that he felt like he didn't have his explosiveness, and now we're unsure of his Week 13 status. So T.Y. Hilton was a decoy, might be a decoy again. We're not really sure. That sucks. Hopefully we have some more information going into this weekend. We'll be sure to update you on it, give our more firm opinions on it on the preview. I feel like I've said that fucking like 30 times on this. I'm going to stop saying that. It's implied. If we don't know that much and the game's not on Thursday, I'll tell you about it in the preview. I swear to God, I will. All right, guys. Chris Carson fumbled twice, led to a very big Rashad Penny game. Penny, who was getting some work before the fumbles, even for Carson, but, particularly afterwards, 49% of the snaps for him, 14 carries, 129 yards, and a touchdown. Now, Rashad Penny has historically been sort of a boomer bust player, reliant on these big plays. But, look, I think you got to downgrade Chris Carson, and I think Rashad Penny should be, depending on what other guys are available or if he's even available. In some leagues, he might not be. But if Penny's on the waiver, which I would assume he would be, then he's your guy this week. Like, they clearly showed that they're trying to get him involved. Again, even before Carson fumbled, he was more involved than he has been for a lot of this year. And then the fumbles have been a huge issue for Carson. They've stuck with him throughout a lot of the season, but how many times can this guy do this before they move away from him? And particularly if Penny's doing things like getting 129 yards on 14 carries. Penny's a guy who's got to be owned. And if no one owns him, you should be going out and getting him right now. The Dolphins, not that we could use them too much with Kalen Ballage being, absolutely terrible, but they're now actually a three-headed running back attack. So this past week, and they were down, so the game script was, more for passing down backs, but Ballage, 24 snaps, 7 carries for 13 yards, 1 catch for also 13 yards. Patrick Laird, 23 snaps, 3 carries for 20 yards, no catches. And then Myles Gaskin, 16 snaps, 4 carries for 10 yards, 1 catch for 7 yards. If you were thinking about playing Kalen Ballage, I know on this past podcast I mentioned I thought they might use Laird a little bit more, and he looked pretty good the week before. I think we can put all of that to rest. Running backs in a 3-way split on a terrible team, none of whom are particularly good, is not a recipe for success. Josh Jacobs. I mentioned before the Raiders broke my heart. Josh Jacobs can clearly be forced out of a game by game script. He's been used in the pass game a little bit more lately, but when they are down big, Jalen Richard is the guy. When they cannot establish the run, they cannot establish the offense. So in a situation like this, which I don't expect to really happen again this year against the Raiders, but the Raiders offense, when they get down big early and they can't use Jacobs effectively, is pretty broken. They suffered from a lot of drop passes this week, but Carr's not effectively getting the ball downfield. They don't have the wide receivers to make it happen, particularly with Hunter Renfrow now even being injured. So Josh Jacobs owners, he's been great. He's been really, really good. His floor is low. And this is something that, we've tried to emphasize a little bit, is that he's only in for 50 to 60% of the snaps. He's only getting something like 2 to 4 targets a game, if that, most of the time. So yeah, his floor is low. He's run really hot because he's really good for a lot of the year. But in some games, no, you know what? You can't really sit him, I don't think. But just be aware that his floor is low. Another thing that I was wrong on from this past week, the Atlanta defense, not for real. I said after these past 2 weeks where they were pretty good, they were significantly better. They shut down the Saints and then the Panthers. The Bucs just let him have it. And a lot of that was Chris Godwin just being an absolute baller. Shouts out to Godwin. I fucking love that guy. I own him on several teams in which he is doing very, very well for me. He also flashed his ceiling this past week, which, I think a lot of people were like, well, was the early season just a fluke? It's like, no, the Tampa Bay wide receivers are just pretty inconsistent because Jameis Winston is their quarterback, but also they love chucking the ball. So they got a real, real high ceiling. And Godwin flashed his this week. Evans probably will soon again. We'll see how it all goes. Anyway, the Atlanta defense. I don't think they're a defense we need to attack as hard as we were early in the season. They are also not a defense to be afraid of at all. They fall into the gigantic bucket of middle-of-the-road defenses where we're not really upgrading or downgrading based on them. I think we're just kind of looking at them and saying, if I like the offense opposite them, then I like the matchup. And if I don't like the offense opposite them, then I don't like the matchup. And realistically, I'll get into this at another time, but realistically, I think the vast majority of the defenses in the NFL are in that bucket. They each have their own particular strengths and weaknesses that you can break down a little bit more granularly. But for the most part, defenses at the tails, so really, really good defenses like the Niners or like the Patriots or like the Steelers, those ones matter. Defenses at the opposite end of the tail, like the Falcons were early in this season, or like the Bengals, or I can't think of any others. The Raiders might apply, or super funnel defenses like the Panthers, the Bucs, like these types of things. These things matter. Most defenses don't matter as much. Sorry, got on a bit of a tangent. We're coming back to it. We're going to break down the Steelers running backs. I kind of mentioned them a little bit earlier. So, on the preview podcast for Week 12, with Shrek, I said you can safely start Jalen Samuels and ignore Benny Snell because he's bad. The Steelers apparently disagree with me because Benny Snell was clearly their lead running back. 49% of the snaps, 21 carries for 98 yards, and he added a catch for 5 yards on one target. Jalen Samuels, 30% of the snaps, 2 carries for 6 yards, 3 targets, 3 catches, 26 yards. I have not looked at the breakdown of where they were lined up, but I have heard that Samuels was lined up in the slot a little bit. I will need to investigate that some, so don't take that as gospel just yet. But I'm not done. There's still 2 more running backs who are involved. Trey Edmonds in on 16% of snaps, only 2 carries for 7 yards. And then Kerrith White, who I had never heard of in my entire life, up until seeing him get a carry and being like, who the fuck is Kerrith White this past week? 9% of the snaps, but 6 carries for 43 yards. So actually not too terrible of production on his limited action. I don't understand this move. Benny Snell was pretty effective in this game, but I really don't get it. I don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. I guess Snell's the guy to play. He's definitely a guy to own. I think this is, a big time just stay away for me at this point. There are 4 running backs getting at least 9% of the snaps in this offense. And while Snell's getting the majority of the actual work, they played the Bengals. Going forward, I don't think this is the correct situation to attack. All right, guys, that's going to do it for week shit. We're moving on. We're moving on to the Thanksgiving slate. So let's get into the meat and potatoes, or the turkey and mashed potatoes. Do you do mashed potatoes or sweet potatoes? Do you do both? I don't know. I'm a huge mashed potatoes guy. I think sweet potatoes are really, really good. I don't like when people put marshmallows on them and serve them as like a side dish, like with the regular meal. Like, I think that's fucking bullshit. Like, marshmallows do not belong with the regular meal. If you're going to put marshmallows on the sweet potatoes, that's a dessert. And I don't think that they should be a dessert. I think you should cook them with some butter and a little bit of brown sugar. And they should be on the table as a side, with the rest of the stuff. Also, side note, a lot of people have been saying like, oh, Thanksgiving dinner is not that good. Thanksgiving dinner is fucking great. Don't listen to those people. All right. First game of the Thanksgiving slate. It is a 9:30 a.m. Pacific start time. So 10:30 Eastern. Chicago at Detroit. Chicago right now is a 3-point favorite. The over-under is 38.5. So we do not expect it to be a high-scoring matchup. And I think the main reason for that, Stafford has not practiced. He is not expected to be back. And now Jeff Driscoll is limited with hamstring tightness in practice, which means we are either getting a hobbled Jeff Driscoll, which, a lot of Driscoll's appeal has been his ability to run so far this season, or we are getting David, and forgive me, David, for mispronouncing this. It is either Blau or Blough, Blough. There's a street in San Francisco called Gough, Gough, and people pronounce it Gough. So I'm guessing this is Blough, but Blough is a very unfortunate last name, and I'm sorry, David. He's a 24-year-old undrafted free agent who would be starting on Thanksgiving Day in his first career NFL start. I think if that's the case, what that does is just makes it really hard to play any sort of passing game Lions. At the tight end, TJ Hawkinson was also limited on Tuesday, and this past week, might have been because of the injury, but he split snaps with Jesse James. And so that really makes them not on the fantasy radar, I think. In terms of the wide receivers, it's really hard to predict where these targets are going to go. Marvin Jones had 11 of them this past week. Like, he could have 3 this coming week, and I wouldn't be surprised. I think the best matchup is Amendola against Buster Skrine in the slot, but, I'm not willing to bet on that if David Blough or a limited Jeff Driscoll is the quarterback. Not my thing. I think the only real play here for me for Detroit is Bo Scarborough, who is clearly the running back to play despite no passing down work. This past week he was in on 51% of the snaps, got 18 carries for 98 yards. And despite Saquon Barkley not having a very productive game this past week against them, running the ball against Chicago since Akeem Hicks has gotten hurt has really been the way to attack them. So for me, if I'm the Giants and I have to start whoever I have to start this week, I am trying to fucking feed Bo Scarborough like a Thanksgiving turkey, but that's not the correct analogy. You don't feed the turkey. You stuff the turkey. I'm trying to feed him like I feed my own mouth at Thanksgiving dinner, which is aggressively and often. So I guess play him. Chicago side of the ball. Trubisky wasn't a bad start this past week, and I think you can kind of go back to him here. I think this is a weird spot because – you're not actively looking to play people in this game, but I think the Bears could kind of dominate it, which means like I'm okay with Trubisky. I think Robinson is a very good play, as he is most weeks. And I kind of think you can roll out David Montgomery or Tariq Cohen, depending on your situation. Montgomery, despite his lack of productiveness, and I called him flat out bad last week, at least 15 touches in his past 6 games. Lions defense isn't good. There are worse places you can go. I think I'd still prefer Scarborough over him in this game, though. And then Tariq Cohen had 9 targets on 55% of the snaps last week, lining up in the backfield and in the slot. I don't hate that. With Taylor Gabriel out, they're going to do some creative things with Cohen. I don't think it's a bad move. And then I guess sort of desperation wide receiver plays, which hopefully you don't have to do. Anthony Miller would be the preferred one. Javon Wims, also not the worst thing that you could do. Definitely not preferred. I'm going to be looking at both of them as interesting daily fantasy plays, as guys who are cheap, who I can throw in there and maybe get some production out of, hopefully at some low ownership, particularly for Wims. But we'll see what happens. I'm going to take Chicago in this game. I don't think it's particularly close. And count me on the train of I think Trubisky's going to have a good game here. I don't think he's dead yet. Buffalo at Dallas. This game is going to be my shit. I think it's the most interesting game of the slate from like a real-life football perspective. I think these are both very good teams that are slightly unorthodox and do it in sort of weird ways, and they're also sort of inconsistent in weird ways. And I just think it's going to be a very, very interesting game. I want to see how it plays out. Now, Dallas is a 6.5-point favorite in this game. The over-under is 46 points. Josh Allen last week, for fantasy purposes, was great. Threw 2 touchdowns. He did throw a pick, but also showed off those legs as he had 9 carries for 56 yards. We certainly like that shit, and we want it to keep going. John Brown only got 4 targets in that game, but he got behind the end zone for, believe it or not, the Bills' first 30-plus yard completion of the year. How about it? We know Josh Allen likes to throw deep, and John Brown can go deep. This is the first time John Brown's really just straight up got behind a defense. So who knows? Maybe it's the sign of things to come. Either way, he got there this past week even with Chris Harris on him. I'm not worried about this matchup, even though it's not spectacular. I think John Brown, if you're sitting him, you're a nut job. Cole Beasley this past week, 9 targets, 6 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown. I think a lot of that is due to John Brown being locked up by Chris Harris, but it's also a Cole Beasley revenge game. And, I think you should play him. I think whether or not they're real, I love the revenge game narrative. I think they're a lot of fun. And that's another reason I like this game. I want to see Cole Beasley just fucking shove Byron Jones off of him at some point or something like that. And then continuing with the Bills, Devin Singletary was in on 70+% of snaps. He got the only 2 running back targets in that game and got 21 carries. Frank Gore got 15 too. So they were really feeding the running back this past game. But yeah, Singletary to me is like a definite play. I would be playing him ahead of Scarborough and Montgomery from the last game. I think he's one of the better running back plays, really behind only Zeke and Kamara on the Thursday games. So Yeah, Singletary to me, I think makes a lot of sense. Frank Gore, despite his 15 carries this past week, only in on 29% of snaps. Count me out on playing Frank Gore unless you're trying to like get lucky and bank 2 touchdowns in a daily tournament. The Cowboys offense. So I think this is an interesting one because the Bills primarily run a zone pass defense. Dak has historically been better against man. But also, I think this Cowboys pass offense is just good. You know, I know they didn't have a great game against the Patriots, and Patriots defense, bad weather, whatever else. Dak's been great in Jerry World. That's where this game is. So I'm buying into him this week. Now, in terms of the pass catchers, I think we can rule out the tight ends. You know, Jarwin's been getting in the end zone a lot, and Witten has been consistent, but he's been consistent in like 4 catches for 45 yards. Like, we don't need that in our lineups. In terms of the pass catchers, Randall Cobb has been wildly consistent the past 4 weeks. He has had either 8 or 7 targets for the past 4 weeks. And I like this matchup against the Bills. I think he can get open against this zone. I think he can do things. I think he's a smart guy. I think he's a guy you should be playing. I think Michael Gallup is also a guy you should be playing, as the strength of the Bills' pass defense is their number 1 cornerback, Tre'Davious White, who will clearly be on Amari Cooper. So Gallup, to me, like it a lot. Think it's a good matchup. I'm rolling him out there. I just mentioned that Cooper will have Tre'Davious White on him. He's been pretty bad these past 2 weeks. You know, he got blanked against the Patriots, but he's not listed on the injury report for the first time all year. And I'll be damned if I am sitting Amari Cooper, a healthy Amari Cooper, no matter what the matchup. He's another guy primarily better against man. But look, I'm not going to bet against him. He's extremely talented. He's shown just how high his ceiling is this year. Like, Cooper's a guy who I think a lot of people are going to be shying off in daily. I think I'm just going to roll him out there. I think I'm going to be using a lot of him because he's so talented and he's not going to deserve the low ownership that he gets. You know, we'll see if it works. I'm scared also with the zone defense thing. I'm going to have to do a little bit more thinking on all of it. But in season long, you're playing Cooper. Don't you fucking dare sit Cooper. And in daily, I am highly considering just 100% Amari Cooper because I think the field will be undervaluing him relative to his talent, you know, in a pure bet on talent over matchup situation. I'm going to take the Bills here. Fuck the Cowboys. Let's go. All right. Last game of Thursday. It will be the Thursday night game. New Orleans at Atlanta. New Orleans is a 7-point favorite with an over-under of 49. A couple notes here for the Atlanta side. So Austin Hooper not expected to go. Julio Jones not practicing today. He looked like he was limited this past week. You know, that's sort of conjecture, but he left the game for a little bit with his shoulder injury. We'll see what happens. Devontae Freeman, full practice today. He is expected to be back. I think he is a borderline play at best. You know, Falcons running backs, including Freeman, have not been particularly productive all year. The Saints defense is very good. It's Freeman's first game back from injury. I'm just not looking to attack that unless I really, really need to. And hopefully you don't. So the rest of Atlanta's offense, Matt Ryan, I think you can find better options. If you don't have them, I'm sorry. Like, I think I'd rather play Trubisky. That might be a hot take, but whatever. Who else do I need to talk about here? Oh, Calvin Ridley. Ridley looked great last week. And historically, Ridley, when he's gotten high target volume, has really been great. And, you know, we thought maybe Russell Gage would step up as a third wide receiver with Sanu gone and Hooper out. But, look, he hasn't done it. Hooper's still not expected to go. To me, Ridley is an obvious start. He's good. And when he gets significant amounts of targets, he performs with them. So, you know, Marshawn Lattimore was limited on Monday. He has a shot to play. I think whether or not he goes, he'd likely be on Julio if he does go. To me, Calvin Ridley is a great play all around. On the New Orleans side of the ball, it's pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. You've got Breeze, great start. You've got Kamara, great start. Cook, really come on over the past couple of weeks. Jared Cook is absolutely a tight end one, needs to be started this week. And then, of course, Michael Thomas has been the best wide receiver in the league, bar none, this year, and needs to be played and will probably go for, 200 yards or some nonsense like that. Kamara, I really think has a chance to blow up as well. I think between, him and Thomas, one of them is going to have the blow up game. I would bet on Kamara. He's a guy that, he's going to be the chalk in these daily contests. He's going to be highly owned in these Thanksgiving daily contests, but I'm not considering fading him, I think, for even a single second. This feels like a blow-up spot for him. Latavius Murray has still been used, but I think really needs a touchdown to get there. It's not the worst bet that you could make. New Orleans is expected to do pretty fucking well here with an implied point total of 28 points. But yeah, I'm not actively trying to get Latavius into a lineup. I think I'm trying to sit him more than I'm trying to play him, if that makes sense. Peripheral options, we have Ted Ginn and Traquan Smith. Now, both of them have been out there. I do not have their target numbers, and I'm going to pull them up very quickly. This past week, Traquan Smith got a touchdown. I believe the week before it was Ted Ginn who got a touchdown. So forgive me while I kind of stall to pull this nonsense up here. All right, so Ted Ginn. Yeah, past 2 weeks, 4 targets and then 5 targets. He's gotten two catches in each of those games. Drew Brees at last game really showed more of a propensity to throw deep than he has all season. We'll see if that continues. But Ginn hasn't really been the beneficiary of that yet. Traquan Smith also kind of hasn't been. Yeah, 1 target 2 weeks ago, 3 targets this past week. He caught one of those 3 targets. It was a red zone target. It was 13 yards and a touchdown. You could go there in daily and just kind of hope for a long touchdown. I don't think it's needed. I don't think I will be. Of course, now that I say that, it's going to happen. One of these guys will have a long touchdown. But he really, Breeze really seemed to be targeting Cook a little bit more down the field. So I don't know. I'll have to look a little bit closer in that, see if there's anything I can discern, any sort of, situations that I might want to attack. But for right now, I'm sticking with the guys that we know in this offense, and that's Kamara, it's Thomas, and it's Cook now as of the second half of the season. All right, guys, I think that is going to do it for the preview of the Thanksgiving game slate. I appreciate you all hanging with me here. I'm sorry it was just me and not someone else to, banter off of or whatever, but hey, I had a good time. I'm going to go watch some professional wrestling, I think. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got. So, please, everyone, enjoy your holidays. Enjoy the food. Play some daily fantasy football if you want to. If you don't want to, then at least set your lineups and enjoy all the games on Thursday. Thanksgiving is a really fun holiday. Historically, I think there's some bad connotations with it, but in modern society, to me, Thanksgiving means a day of eating, a day of drinking, and a day of watching football, which I think those might be my 3 favorite things in the world. So not too bad. All right, guys, for Let's Talk Fantasy Football, I am Walsh. Later, podcast.
This has been Let's Talk Fantasy Football. Thanks for listening.